Okay, we had a group that had mostly students in it, except for Deborah and I, who are students of life. So identifying like the fragile area is that they have preset surveys, but that for like end of term, but they don't have any questions pertaining to any of this on it. And while they're anonymous and there is a free space to write, it doesn't really set an expectation. But in the good news portion is they're saying that a lot of the teachers are reaching out and really trying to make sure that the environment is safe for the students. But we thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get questions that lead towards an expectation of open communication and equity and safety onto the end of term surveys and also in the CPI, so that clinical sites are being held accountable and have an expectation of this. I have no idea how to change that, but if we could make that happen, it'd be cool.
Oh, if I could make that happen? Yeah. I'm just messing with you.
If we could make that happen. There are some educators in the room, though, so we could tell them that.
But I would like to comment on that. That's a specific systemic change. That's looking at policy, that's looking at how we're measuring effectiveness, how we're measuring safety, and it also challenges our leaders and decision makers and thought leaders to change, to create a space of soft landing for everyone, so that people don't have that added stress of having to having to develop that navigational capital, right? Or maybe we all get that navigational capital and we all elevate it from that. So I love that idea. I love that idea. Round of applause. I think there was a hand raised up somewhere. Another group? Yep.
We are a pretty mixed group of PT students and massage therapists, and one of the things that was getting really interesting, just as you called time, were word usage and how words that some people, because of cultural backgrounds or experiences may find triggering. Like, for example, we were talking about the use of treatment table versus treatment bed, or we were talking about how even the word relax from a trauma-informed perspective can be triggering for someone who was being assaulted and the assaulter was constantly saying relax. And so how to navigate that and how to create that safe experience and interaction. It was really actually very enlightening. So thanks for that.
Absolutely. I think the choice of language, as you're right, is very important. It's speaking to that cultural community wealth, right? Where having that linguistic capital and navigating different cultures and of course different experiences. So then you can kind of lean on your colleagues, students to say, oh, okay, please check me on this, right? Please educate me. Because I know that even though there was a big push, I think, especially during George Floyd, where people say, don't make black people be your teacher. But the thing is, that is the burden, right? But we also have to be in a space to not just receive, because I think a lot of us spend a lot of time collecting information, and we need to actually move forth in action, right? It's the action-oriented approach that we have to start taking in order to really move the needle on this, because we can't claim to have inclusive environments if we're still having students feeling like they can't be their true selves, our patients, our colleagues. There is a specific reason why marginalized groups with terminal degrees do not have the same health status as a white person who doesn't have a high school diploma, particularly Black women. And so we really want to make sure we can close the gap, and that gap, and we're part of that problem. It's not just minimizing our fried chicken, grape drink, all of that. It's about creating spaces where everyone feels safe so that they don't have to deal with that internal physiological response to racism and stress and everything in between.
Yeah, thank you. So, interesting thing in our group, I currently am living in Boise, Idaho, and just so happened to meet Taryn, who went to Boise State for a few years. And Taryn is, can I refer to you as being biracial. Is that fair? So Taryn shared that he's biracial, and then also Jocelyn in our group shared that she is of an Indigenous people background. And here I am, totally, I just own it, right? Caucasian, very privileged. And just talking about in where I am right now, I've lived in multiple states. Idaho's the 6th state I've lived in. I've lived in much more racially populous areas like Milwaukee, went to college in Milwaukee, and realizing that I desperately want to check these biases to strive for all these ideals, and I'm in a workplace that is I don't have almost anyone of color at all to have access to. And so recognizing that and trying to just strive for, it's not even anything that's on our radar, unfortunately, and this was making me really realize that. And then hearing Jocelyn and Taryn's own experiences, the fact also too, the dynamic they shared personally is that at face value, they don't present. And that was something that we really talked about. And almost feeling like sometimes it's an advantage, but then I said in my heart, and I don't understand it as well, that almost was hard for me to hear. I wouldn't want that to be that way. So those were some of the topics that we talked about.
I think you hit the nail on the head on an issue when you're saying you're in a predominantly white space and you're like, we don't have, colleagues of color to kind of draw from. But I think that's the key of inclusive leadership, is to have these conversations no matter who's in the room. That's part of the learning. Even if it's all white people, even if it's all black people, even if it's all Indigenous people, we have to have these conversations about race, about that initial insult. How do we minimize that perpetuating injury? So it's actually, you have this beautiful opportunity to be like, look, let's have a roundtable. Let's talk about this. Let's make this part of our staff meeting every once in a while. Let's create a culture where we can openly discuss these concerns. And even though you may not have someone who can testify to say, this is my experience, but you can still be introspective and think about the impact of you being silent, right? You participating. How are you participating in perpetuating that initial insult? With the systemic oppression, with the personally mediated stuff, and also the things that you internalize, right? Because we all do it.
Just really quickly, you have some queer colleagues and your clients and patients.
Yes.
So that, as a queer person who's also a person of color.
Would you mind saying it?
Yeah, sure. Yes, but think about queer people, whether you're talking about professional colleagues or clients or patients. As a mixed Indigenous queer person, we are wherever you are, anywhere in this country, I promise you.
So actually, I'll wait for that. So second part to that, sorry, that's really loud. So that's the interesting dynamic, is I don't have accessibility or not around persons of color as much, but I have several colleagues that are out and very supported, and several clients as well. So that's really interesting to have that. So here's this one group that unfortunately has been more traditionally segregated, that has found in our culture where we are, that doesn't seem to be the issue. It's just the other areas. So yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else want to share what their team noticed over the past 2 years?
I'm going to check the online crew
Yep.
real quick.
No?
I'm not seeing it. It might take a minute to load up. Anyone else in the room want to share thoughts?
As a student, as many of us are students, it's interesting coming into this graduate level community of people who have sort of made an effort in their life to be a healthcare provider who is, empathetic, passionate, and caring for people. And I feel like meeting so many of these students who have had amazing backgrounds and are just so, open and wanting to connect with everybody, that this healthcare community, I think naturally, at least in this area where it's diverse, it just seems like there are natural ways of becoming more, what's the word? well, okay, sorry. Now everyone's turning and looking at me, and I'm kind of like, oh shoot, now I'm talking to an audience.
You're doing good. You're doing good.
Like,
You're doing good.
basically what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, everybody turn around. If you can just turn around for me, great. I'm kidding. It seems like people in this area in San Diego are more exposed to a more diverse population, so we kind of have our own innate ways of becoming more inclusive and developing our own mental personal strategies for addressing these issues, especially for this healthcare community. And so it's one thing to have had those personal, individualized ways of dealing with, these issues, but it's another thing to take it to the next level and be aware of people are not conscious of this and take it to that, empowerment and educative level of, kind of like, strategizing how to minimize the injury that we've been talking about. So I don't know. It just seems like we are doing a great job of, being open, but now we got to be more actionable, which is what you're talking about. So I don't know. Something else I want to talk about.
No, I think I love what you said, because you're absolutely right. I think that you're saying that you all have gone through that contemplative phase where you're open and you're willing and you're like, okay, we now know. We know what the research says. We know what we got to do. We've done that level of work. And now it's about, okay, so how do I actually do this in a real sustaining way that has impact, right? That actually makes a difference. So one of the things is that I always tell people to think about is conflict management, right? So if there's a conflict, how is that managed? Examine how that managed. What are the policies? Is it transparent, right? Is promotion transparent? Is that process pretty linear, right? Pretty clear? And when I talked about that concept of accountability, right? I will give you an example. So when I was a few years ago, I spoke to one of my supervisors and I said, let's call this person Amy Cooper. And I said, Amy Cooper cries a lot in meetings when I propose an opposing issue, and it shuts down the meeting, and it makes it really difficult for us to move forward. But it never happens when my other colleague does it, who's white, right? And every time I would talk about it, my supervisor would say, well, they're just really passionate, right? They really care, and that's why, they're just really sensitive. Same thing would happen if they yelled. And so that manager went through training, and they came to me a few years later saying, I didn't realize how dismissive and minimizing your experience that was for me to do that to you. I'm so sorry. And that, I didn't even realize that because I'm just used to that. But man, to have that acknowledgement, I was like, I'm going to stay an hour later for work today. Right? Like, I'm going to do these charts at work, not at home. Right? But I think that when we think about those little things and how they really do add up, those microaggressions kind of minimize my bandwidth, right? It minimizes the bandwidth for everyone. So.
Okay, so we do have one online comment from Jamie Lowy. He says that I've carried the discomfort from your last summit talk as the energy I needed to continue the conversation in my workspaces.
That's fantastic. That is really great. I think the discomfort is something that we all should share. It's not a solo burden, right? It's a collective burden.
All right, and then we also have a question from Sheila, I believe online. I don't know. Oh, she's here. Excellent. So she asks, do you want to ask since you're in the room? Seems silly for me to read it for you.
My question was for the end, but yeah.
Well, we're almost
But okay.
Yeah, we have about 4 minutes left.
So can I spend maybe 30 seconds on? So I just wanted to say, with my group, I feel like I appreciate that we're kind of in different stages, but everybody was willing to be honest. And so I'm an OT. We're 84% white in our profession. And so I'm South Asian, so I'm a racialized person. I have brown skin, but I also recognize the privilege that I have. And so I'd say over the past 2 years, I was doing a lot of kind of educating all my white peers and being that token person because I felt like I have privilege. I can take on more of a burden. And it was totally burning me out, and it was pissing me off, and it was super frustrating, and nothing was happening. I was doing all this work for free. And so what I've done more recently is I'm trying to center my BIPOC peers, creating like healing spaces, creating groups for practitioners, creating opportunities for BIPOC students. And so my question was really kind of based on like, how do you navigate being asked, like you're given breadcrumbs, like if you consult, you can charge a certain amount, but people don't really want to pay, they don't want to take on like that systemic policy, procedure work. Most people just kind of want to reflect. They want you to do a lecture. So, to me, it feels like the decision is, okay, either I know, I'm feeling pressure. I feel like I don't really get nervous. Thanks. But because to me, it's like, it's personal. So, when you're racialized, you already have this, like, I already understand I'm not uncomfortable. I'm kind of at that point, like, let's do stuff. Like, let's take action. I don't understand what's taking so long. And some people are just at the point of, I didn't even see what was going on. It's like, I didn't have a choice, right? I know I have privilege, but some of us didn't even have a choice. We're already living that life. So, like, do you take those breadcrumbs because you're like, well, otherwise they're not going to do anything, or they're going to fill it with, like, something, somebody else who's willing to do it for free, or somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about is going to fill that space? Or do you suck it up and just know, okay, I'm just going to plant the seeds knowing that this probably isn't going to be long term, they're not invested, they're not sharing power, they just, like, how do you navigate that? I know they're not invested, but they're asking me to do something. Do I do it or do I not do it?
So that is the best, like one of the best questions I've heard in a long time, because it's something that I have struggled with myself. And I think this is a great question for everyone in the room to hear. So here's my answer to you. Do you? You need to protect yourself, right? So if you decide, I spent 2 years doing the breadcrumb work. I spent the past 2 years growing myself. I spent the past 2 years doing all the things that I talked about. Your price went up. Your price went up. You're like, if you want me to invest and give this part of myself, then you're going to pay me appropriately for that, for my time, for my expertise, for the work that I'm doing that you benefit from. And then you have discovery calls with people. If you're like, oh, you just want a lecture, I have a great colleague that can do that for you. I'll send them your way, right? But oh, you actually want to do the work, I'm down for that, because that's where I want to put my energy. I want to put my energy into helping you change your culture, and that's my skill set. But these other people are great at doing the kind of touch point thing, the HR thing that you need, right? But where's your skill set? Where do you want to see yourself grow, and where do you want to put your gifts at? And that's where you center yourself, because what you're willing to do now it may not be what you're willing to do in 2 years. Any other questions?
Yeah, so we have one more online that I think would actually be a beautiful way to wrap up, from Karen Litzy. Sorry, more comments came in and I lost her. Okay. So how is making a difference measured in real world situations, or should it say, how can we measure making a difference?
Yeah, so I think measuring making a difference is to look at like I always say, doing an assessment like quarterly with yourself and say, what is happening with my environment? Let me talk to my colleagues, let me talk to my students, wherever that space is, and saying, what do we need to improve on here? What is your experience? Okay, here are the things that we're going to do. And then we're going to check it. Like right now in our department, we have a dashboard. We have goals, right? Equity goals. And we're going to check in with each other. So then we know, okay, here are the things that we've objectively done to move action forward, but has that translated to building trust? Has that translated to people feeling like there's equitable accountability? Has that translated to people feeling less oppressed, less stressed? Has that increased their bandwidth to participate in this space? And I think it's also about knowing that the job is never done. So that's another thing. There's always more to do. Like I said, it's this is a lifelong thing. And we just have to elevate ourselves every day so that we minimize the impact of systemic oppression. That's our job as leaders.
I feel like I should give this to you so you can drop it, but I think the sound guys probably wouldn't like it very much. So everyone, let's just thank Uchenna for a great talk. All right, and now